It's time for the next lecture for our class. Today's topic, interest groups, lobbying, and money.
The focus for the presentation would deal with interest groups. First, we'll look at the different types that are out there. Political scientists break them down into two groups, public versus private. Next, we'll explore the tactics that they use to achieve their goals. Often, they're engaged in direct and indirect lobbying. One of the tactics that's also important deals with money. In a way, that's almost its own separate tactic, but we'll also explore PACs and how money impacts the political process. Since we'll be discussing interest groups throughout the course of the presentation, I should probably define what they are. An interest group is an organization that tries to get the government to pass laws to help its cause. Essentially, it's a group of like-minded people who want the government to be responsive to their needs. That's all it is.
Throughout this presentation, there will be several interest groups and PACs that are mentioned. You only need to worry about being tested on the ones that are listed here, and they also appear on the lecture outline. The interest groups that you need to know are the NRA and the AARP. PACs include MoveOn.org, Emily's List, America First, and the NRA is not only an interest group, it's also a PAC.
Now that we've defined what an interest group is, we should probably explore the different types that are out there. There are thousands of interest groups that lobby on behalf of the American people in Washington, D.C. One type of interest groups, as identified by political scientists, would be public interest groups. They lobby for causes to try to benefit all in society. There are many different types of public interest groups with different focal points. Environmental organizations often lobby the government. Have you ever heard of the Sierra Club? This has been around since the 1890s. One impact that it had was that it lobbied the government to expand the national park system. People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, or PETA, also lobbies these days. Many religious organizations also lobby the government. Religious organizations actually have been lobbying the government going back to the very first session of Congress. An example here would be the Quakers. They were very much against the institution of slavery, and they petitioned the government in the 1790s to eliminate slavery. Today, another religious organization would be the Christian Coalition. You see their website on the right. So, some religious organizations would include the Christian Coalition, which focuses on many different religious issues. Prayer in schools, anti-abortion. It's also supportive of traditional marriage, or it's against gay marriage, among other topics. Operation Rescue is another religious group. It's a single-issue interest group. Its focus is against abortion. Another public interest group would be the National Rifle Association. It also is a single-issue interest group, and it focuses on protection of gun ownership rights for the American people, not just members of their organization, but any American. The second type of interest group would be private interest groups. Their focus is more narrow. Their goal is to lobby the government for causes to try to benefit members of their organization first. Essentially, their focus is on their members, and they want to protect their rights. If other people's rights are protected at the same time, that's fine, but their focus is on members first. Some examples of private interest groups would include professional organizations. These are groups of people who all work in the same profession. Some examples here would include the American Medical Association, the American Bar Association, and the National Education Association. Now, you may or may not be familiar with the professional organizations described or mentioned on the previous slide. The AMA? Well, this involves people in the medical field. Many doctors belong to the American Medical Association. Many attorneys belong to the Bar Association. You may or may not be familiar with the bar exam that all lawyers or attorneys have to pass in order to practice law. in terms of full disclosure, I should let you know that I happen to be a member of the National Education Association. This involves many people who are educators, many teachers or professors. There are many other organizations as well. Many older Americans belong to an organization called AARP, or the American Association of Retired People. On the right, you see their website. You see some of the specific topics that they're interested in: economic security, health and healthcare, politics and government, long-term care. So they lobby the government on many issues involving older Americans. Lastly, businesses also lobby in Washington, D.C., whether it's the oil industry, autos, or maybe even the medical field. Businesses and industry also lobby in Washington, D.C. Now that we've addressed some of the types of interest groups that are out there, let's explore some of the tactics that they use to achieve their goals. One of the most important tactics, and most effective, would involve direct lobbying. This is when lobbyists speak directly with an elected official because it's difficult to actually get face time with an elected official. Most lobbying actually takes place indirectly. What happens here is when the lobbyists try to mobilize average people like you and me to shape public opinion so that we place pressure on politicians themselves. One specific way that they do this is by using the telephone tree. You may or may not be familiar with the way a telephone tree works. This is how one organization does it. They make a decision that they're going to mobilize their members. And so they have one person make a phone call to 3 or 4 people. And then those 3 or 4 people make phone calls to 3 or 4 more each. And then all of those individuals call 3 or 4 more people. And then they place pressure on elected officials to try to take action on a particular topic. One of the organizations that's been the most effective at using the telephone tree is AARP. In the past, they've used it again and again to contact elected officials to pass legislation that would protect or increase the benefits for senior citizens in the country. Overall, because of their effective use of the telephone tree, AARP is considered today to be one of the most effective lobbying organizations in the nation. Other examples of indirect lobbying include mailings and social media. Mailings involve the letters, or what some people consider junk mail, that we might receive in our mailbox. However, social media has become much more effective in the last decade. Here we see a couple of websites. On the top, we see the NRA's page, but this isn't just their web page, this is their Facebook page. They get a lot of information out, and there are many likes that are on this NRA page, and it's a way to communicate with their members. On the bottom, we see the website for the Sierra Club. Again, this is a way that they could try to get a message out, and here you can see that President Obama is being targeted, and they're trying to get him to say no to a pipeline from Canada down to Louisiana. On the right, we see some Facebook pages. But one of the things I want to focus on would be the circled area here. On this individual's Facebook page, there's a site that's an advertisement that actually helps people find their polling place. These have become so sophisticated that they actually target advertisements to try to encourage people to vote for certain candidates based upon their website visits and their different likes. The top one shows an advertisement for President Obama, and on the bottom we see an advertisement for Governor Romney. Each ran for the presidency in 2012. The previous slides focused a bit on history and social media. This slide shows a research survey that was done in 2024 heading into the presidential election. On the left, we see that if people are looking to try to find information about politics, they would look to X, or formerly known as Twitter. On the right, people do access TikTok and Facebook and Instagram, but that's not as important as X in terms of finding out information about politics. I found this slide from the same survey interesting as well. On the left, you see that in 2021, most Republican users of X, formerly known as Twitter, thought that social media had a positive impact on democracy. Yet in the middle there, by 2024, most of these Republican users of X thought that social media had a mostly bad impact on democracy. Another example of indirect lobbying would involve civil disobedience. Here's kind of a textbook definition of what's meant by civil disobedience. It's when a person violates a law on purpose. They violate what they believe to be an immoral law. But then they accept the punishment for violating that law. Why would they do this? Well, the goal is to bring about publicity for their cause and ideally, change. Possibly the best example of someone who was engaged in civil disobedience would be Rosa Parks. She refused to move to the back of the bus, and eventually she was arrested. Then the entire community in Montgomery, Alabama mobilized. They used peaceful protest, and they boycotted the buses until a change was put into place. They were successful in the 1950s. The last tactic I'd like to explore today would be money, and how money impacts the political process. Money is a form of indirect lobbying, but it's also pretty complicated, so that's why I've got it down here as a separate tactic in many ways. So what I want to do is I want to look at money, how it impacts elections, the limits that are in place as to how much money people can contribute, but there are also loopholes in the system. Before I move on to money, I want to address one of the definitions that I looked at in one of the first slides. An interest group is an organization that tries to get the government to pass laws to help their cause. Remember that rhyme. They try to pass laws to help their cause. Okay? Keep that in mind. The money side of lobbying involves PACs. This stands for Political Action Committees. PACs, or Political Action Committees, are private organizations. They can be businesses or corporations, they can be labor unions, they even can be interest groups as well. But their focus is on raising and spending money to use in elections. Now, there's an entire governmental agency designed to enforce all of the regulations that come to raising and spending money for campaigns. This is called the Federal Elections Commission. They've actually got a great website that I've used before, and it's called fec.gov. This is their webpage. I previously offered examples of interest groups that had an influence on politics. I'd like to talk about some important PACs as well. The first, I've already mentioned. This would be the NRA and its Political Victory Fund. Not only does the NRA lobby to pass laws to help their cause, they also raise money primarily for Republican candidates. Another important PAC would be MAGA, or Make America Great Again. This is a super PAC, which I'll talk more about in a little bit, that supports Donald Trump. On the right, we see the front page for the MAGA website with an image of Donald Trump. And on the left, we see some examples of some of the commercials that were made by MAGA that were critical of President Biden. The NRA and MAGA support Republican candidates and Donald Trump. Another PAC supports Democrats. That would be MoveOn.org. On the left, we see the front page for MoveOn.org. And on the right, there's a video that the organization produced. What's interesting here is that MoveOn combined with social media in order to produce these videos, as seen on the right. This one is actually from Instagram. I wanted to mention another organization, and this is called Emily's List. Emily's List has a focus of trying to elect pro-choice women to public office, particularly Democrats. The front page for Emily's list is shown here on the right. The name Emily is actually rather unique. It stands for something. It stands for a motto that Emily's list has. It stands for early money is like yeast. If you were to take flour and have some water and add some yeast to it, that flour would then puff up and it would rise. So if you give early money to a candidate who's running for office, it will allow that candidate to acquire even more money. So that's their motto. Early money is like yeast.
I wanted to highlight these 4 PACs for a reason. The first 2 support Republican candidates, and the second set support Democrats. There's a lot of PACs that are out there. Often they're supporting members of one political party or another. And I just also wanted to be fair by identifying 2 in support of each of the major parties.
Now that we've defined some terms and identified some PACs, I'd like to look at some legal limits on the amount of money that people can contribute to candidates, but there are also some loopholes in the system. The legal limits fall under a law called McCain-Feingold. It's named for the 2 individuals who were shown here. On the left, we see Senator Russell Feingold. He was a Democrat from Wisconsin. And on the right is John McCain, a Republican from Arizona, and you may remember that he ran against President Obama in 2008 for the presidency. The 2 came together to try to put limits on campaign spending because they thought that it had a negative impact. All that money had a negative impact on the political system.
So, under McCain-Feingold, there are strict limits on the amount of money an individual is allowed to contribute directly to candidates and to traditional PACs. In a single election, an individual is only allowed to contribute $3,300 to a candidate running for office. By the way, this figure is adjusted for inflation every 2 years. An individual is also limited to giving $5,000 to a single traditional PAC. It doesn't matter how wealthy an individual may be, they can only contribute up to $5,000 directly to a PAC and $3,300 directly to a single candidate running for office. There are also limits on the amount of money PACs can contribute directly to a candidate. They're only allowed to contribute $5,000 to a candidate per each election.
While McCain-Feingold established strict limits, there are unfortunately loopholes within the system. One example would be super PACs. There is no limit on the amount of money an individual donor can contribute to a super PAC. This is a PAC that goes through an additional process and fills out some additional forms. However, there's a limit on how that money can be spent. No direct contributions from any super PACs can be given to an individual candidate.
So you may be saying to yourself, what the heck does that mean? Well, I'll try to explain. A super PAC like MoveOn.org supports Democratic candidates. They can raise as much money as they want, but they cannot contribute a penny to any Democrat running for office. They can run ads in support of Joe Biden or another Democrat, but they can't contribute any money directly to Joe Biden's campaign. The same would be true for America First. They raised money for Republicans and they were strongly supportive of President Trump. However, they couldn't contribute any money directly to President Trump's campaign or another Republican. They can run an ad critical of Democrats or supportive of a particular candidate, but they couldn't give money directly to a candidate, him or herself.
Another loophole in the system came about a couple of years ago with the Supreme Court decision. This was called Citizens United. What this did was it allowed businesses or corporations to spend unlimited amounts of money on what are called independent advertisements. They couldn't give money directly to candidates' campaigns. However, they could run their own advertisements for or against a particular candidate. They just couldn't give money directly to candidates' campaigns.
One last loophole is shown here. There are no limits on the amount an individual can contribute to a particular PAC or campaign. And so here we see the top contributors to both Republican as well as Democratic PACs as well as candidates. The fear here is that an individual who's really rich can get the ear of a candidate who wins office and then conduct favors for that particular candidate.
So what's been the impact of all this money involved with politics? Well, we see a huge increase in what's called negative spending. A textbook one-sentence definition of this concept would be to spend money in a campaign to attack the credibility or political stances of one's opponent. As opposed to saying, hey, vote for me, I've got the experience, I'm the person with the best plan for the environment or education. Instead of saying positive things about yourself, what we see these days is a lot of negative attack ads where one candidate says, don't vote for him, don't vote for her, for whatever reason. What we've also seen is that the number of attack ads has increased dramatically in the last 20 years or so. So we see a couple of examples here. There's an attack ad on the left on the top attacking Joe Biden, and another on the bottom attacking Donald Trump.
Well, we're just about at the end. I'd like to review some of the main ideas that we covered in this presentation. So, as a bit of review, this presentation summarized the actions of interest groups. There are different types of interest groups, public and private. They use different tactics to achieve their goals, direct as well as indirect lobbying. Money also plays an important role in the political process. What you want to be able to do is you want to be able to summarize these actions and then evaluate something. Do you think interest groups have a positive or negative impact on our political system? Well, that's it for today. I hope you learned something new, and we'll see you in class very soon. Have a good day.